In a quiet southern town just a few miles off the interstate, life can feel as if it runs on a time loop. Folks greet each other with a friendly wave. Church bells ring every Sunday, and dusty roads lead to the same old diner where regulars know your name. But beneath the surface of routine, a single moment can shatter all illusions of peace and fairness. This is the story of one heroic act that saved an entire community, and the heartbreaking betrayal that followed. In a place where kindness and cruelty teeter precariously side by side, destinies can collide in ways no one ever expects. Maplewood, Georgia, was a small town with a big heart at least. That was its reputation. Situated about an hour outside of Atlanta, Maplewood boasted a charming main street flanked by brick buildings and Victorian-style homes, a leafy town square with an old Confederate statue that had become the subject of quiet controversy, and a close-knit community that prided itself on neighborly warmth. Yet, beneath those friendly waves and covered dish suppers, tensions simmered, shaped by decades of complicated history and the wounds that never fully healed from the civil rights era. Kevin Mitchell moved to Maplewood a decade ago after finishing his master's degree at the University of Georgia. He'd grown up in Columbus, watching his father, a dedicated volunteer firefighter, serve the community with unwavering devotion. Inspired by his father's humility and courage, Kevin became a youth coordinator and mentor at the Maplewood Community Center. Everyone in town, from teachers to shop owners, knew him. He was the cool big brother to dozens of teenagers who might otherwise wander the streets with nothing to do. He organized after-school programs, basketball leagues, and weekend cleanup events. Kevin was not just a friendly face. He was a pillar of Maplewood. At 32, he stood tall, with broad shoulders that made him the perfect volunteer for hauling boxes of canned goods or building houses for Habitat for Humanity. His laughter was infectious, brightening every volunteer shift. He was also well-read, quoting James Baldwin and Maya Angelou to inspire the teens in his programs. Though Kevin was relatively new to Maplewood, his commitment was absolute. He truly believed that one dedicated person could uplift an entire town. Not everyone was supportive, though. In a place steeped in old traditions and the silent resentments that lingered in the corners of dinner conversations, a black man, in a role of civic leadership, sometimes sparked tension. While most Maplewood residents adored Kevin, a handful of them, often older, with deep-seated prejudices, kept their distance. They'd make offhand comments questioning how someone not from here and a little too big for his britches could hold such influence over local youth. Kevin brushed it off. He'd long learned to deal with ignorance with a patient heart. And then there was Officer Bradley Harper, a Maplewood police officer in his mid-40s, born and bred in the town. He came from a long line of local law enforcement. His father, grandfathers, and even a great-uncle had all served in the Maplewood Police Department. To outsiders, Bradley was polite enough, but he had a reputation that made the local black community uneasy. He rarely passed up an opportunity for random traffic stops when the drivers happened to be people of color, and his eyes always seemed to flicker with suspicion. He hadn't openly displayed overt racism, at least not in a way that garnered official complaints, but his tone, his posture, his entire aura suggested a man who believed certain folks needed to be kept in line. Kevin and Bradley had crossed paths before community events, the occasional run-in at the diner, but never for more than a brief greeting. Both men exchanged polite nods and forced smiles, hiding the unspoken tension behind them. A part of Kevin wanted to believe that maybe, deep down, Bradley wasn't a terrible man, but experience taught him to remain vigilant. One scorching July afternoon, the humidity wrapped around Maplewood like a wet blanket. Thunderclouds loomed on the horizon, promising a heavy storm. By early evening, rain poured in torrents, drenching the streets and swelling the creek that wound through the eastern edge of town. Maplewood had seen floods before, but nothing like this. Within hours, the creek overflowed, water rushing into neighborhoods, submerging parked cars, forcing families to flee their homes. Kevin, already at the community center, got the news via panicked phone calls from parents. He immediately pulled together a small team of volunteers, grabbed the center's emergency supplies, bottled water, blankets, first aid kits, and headed to the hardest-hit neighborhood by the old railroad tracks. Ambulances and police units were dispatched, but the roads were quickly turning into rivers. One car, a red Toyota Camry, got stuck on a flooded street near the Maplewood Elementary School. Its driver, Miss Janet Porter, was one of Kevin's close friends, a young single mother with 2 children buckled in the back seat. When Kevin arrived at the scene, chest deep in water, the front of the Camry was pinned against a concrete barrier, the engine smoking, and water pouring in through the doors. Janet was screaming for help, her kids crying in terror. Without hesitating, Kevin waded through the swirling water. Another volunteer, Mark Davidson, helped pry open the back door, while Kevin fought against the current to unfasten the children's seat belts. A floating tree branch slammed into Kevin's side, knocking him off balance. He gasped, water rushing into his mouth, but he steadied himself and managed to lift the children to safety in Mark's arms. Meanwhile, Janet's door wouldn't budge. It was jammed. Kevin circled to the driver's side, trying to yank it open. Water rose to his shoulders now, and Janet was in a panic as it seeped past her waist. Finally, Kevin found a crowbar in the trunk. It took every bit of his strength to crack the door open, and he nearly lost his footing in the raging current. At last, Janet was free. She collapsed, sobbing, into Kevin's arms. Emergency sirens blared in the distance, but for the moment, it was Kevin and a handful of volunteers who were truly saving lives. By midnight, Maplewood was in chaos. Houses were ruined, vehicles were swept away, and the entire eastern side of town lay underwater. The next day, local news outlets, including a crew from CNN that happened to be in the region covering storm damage, filmed Kevin helping families evacuate. They caught footage of him carrying a small child on his back through waist-deep water. It aired statewide, then nationally. In the days that followed, Maplewood residents called Kevin a hero. Social media exploded with praise. Donations for flood relief poured in from neighboring counties. The community center became a makeshift shelter, and Kevin slept there on a cot each night to coordinate volunteers. Even the mayor publicly thanked him at a press conference, but an undercurrent of tension lingered. Many saw Kevin's heroism as proof that Maplewood's future belonged to those who believed in unity rather than division. Others, however, harbored resentment, no one more so than Officer Bradley Harper. Less than a week after the flood, when the water receded and families began returning to their homes, Kevin finally took a breather. With the community center stable and volunteers organized, he borrowed a truck from a neighbor to pick up more supplies from a warehouse in Atlanta. It was a short drive, no more than an hour, and Kevin was eager to get back quickly so he could help distribute the goods. On his way back, as he entered Maplewood's town limits, flashing blue lights lit up his rearview mirror. Kevin's stomach sank when he saw that familiar patrol car. Officer Bradley Harper. Kevin pulled over, heart pounding, unsure if he'd done anything wrong. He rolled down his window, hands on the steering wheel. Bradley approached with that rigid posture, resting a hand on his holster. "License and registration," Bradley said curtly, eyeing Kevin. "Certainly, officer," Kevin replied, keeping his tone respectful. He handed over the documents, trying to maintain calm. Bradley's lip curled. "You know why I stopped you?" "No, sir. You were going 46 in a 35, Bradley said, even though Kevin was sure he'd kept the speedometer at 35. Kevin considered his next words carefully. "Officer, I was pretty sure I was under the limit." Bradley's gaze hardened. "Are you questioning me?" Kevin exhaled. "No. I'm just step out of the vehicle," Bradley ordered, stepping back and resting a hand on his sidearm. Kevin's heart thumped. He'd heard stories, seen headlines, but he'd never expected this level of hostility from Bradley. Slowly, Kevin unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. Bradley ordered him to face the truck, patted him down, and demanded to search the vehicle. Kevin wanted to refuse. The truck belonged to his friend, and he had no reason to believe Bradley had probable cause. But he also felt a knot of fear. The tension was thick, the moment precarious. Then, as if the universe had orchestrated the moment for maximum drama, a local news crew returning from a shoot about the flood relief happened to drive by. Their van slowed. They recognized Kevin and started filming the scene from across the street. Soon, a crowd gathered, people who knew Kevin, people who couldn't believe their eyes. "Isn't that Kevin Mitchell?" someone murmured. "He just saved half the town last week," another whispered. The onlookers watched with growing anger and confusion as Bradley rummaged through the supplies in the truck bed: blankets, canned goods, bottled water, cleaning supplies. In the glove box, he found nothing but the truck's registration and insurance. Finally, it was clear there was nothing unlawful to pin on Kevin. Bradley's face was flushed, either from embarrassment or anger, likely both. He stared at Kevin, the tension of years of ingrained bias twisting in his eyes. Then he wrote a ticket, handed it over without a word, and retreated to his cruiser. The crowd was stunned. Kevin stood by the truck, shaking. People rushed to him, offering words of support. Someone shouted, "We're calling the mayor." Another threatened to report the officer to the Maplewood Police Department's internal affairs. Kevin's phone buzzed incessantly, with texts and calls for the rest of the evening. Local headlines the next day read, "Town hero harassed by Maplewood police." The incident sparked a wave of outrage on social media. The local branch of the NAACP issued a statement condemning racial profiling. Calls flooded the mayor's office demanding Officer Bradley Harper's suspension. Yet, in Maplewood's quieter corners, many defended Bradley's actions, claiming he was just doing his job. Still, the scales of public opinion were tipping. Kevin's heroic rescue wasn't easily forgotten. The Maplewood Police Department tried to quell the controversy. The police chief gave a brief statement. "We are investigating the matter. Meanwhile, we request that citizens refrain from jumping to conclusions." But the videos taken by the news crew, along with cell phone footage from bystanders, told a clear story of intimidation. Even those who didn't typically speak out began to question the department's integrity. All the while, Kevin struggled with conflicting emotions: anger, frustration, sadness, and a sense of betrayal churned in his gut. He had risked his life to save neighbors, only to be publicly humiliated by an officer who seemed determined to treat him as a criminal. Still, Kevin tried to channel his emotions positively. He organized a peaceful march, dubbed the Unity Walk, to call for transparency in local policing. More than 300 townspeople showed up, carrying signs reading "Justice for Kevin" and "End Racial Profiling." They sang hymns as they walked from the community center to the front steps of the police station. Officer Bradley Harper watched the march from a distance, perched in his patrol car at the edge of the route. Hidden behind tinted windows, he fumed. In his eyes, Kevin's transformation into a media darling was a challenge to everything he believed about Maplewood, about his own legacy as a law enforcer. He told himself he wasn't racist, that this was just the liberal media and outside agitators stirring up trouble. But deep within, he sensed a crack forming in his worldview, one that threatened to shatter if he acknowledged the possibility that he might indeed be part of the problem. Days turned into weeks. The story reached the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Then CNN ran another segment comparing Kevin's rescue efforts to the blatant harassment he faced. Footage of the traffic stop replayed on national TV, fueling debates about small-town policing and racial bias. Maplewood's mayor faced pressure from both ends: civil rights activists on one side, and older, more conservative constituents on the other. The mayor called for calm, promising a thorough investigation, but stopping short of calling for Bradley's resignation. Bradley Harper grew up in a house filled with law enforcement memorabilia. His father, Harold Harper, was a decorated officer who famously clashed with civil rights activists back in the 1960s and 70s. Although never formally disciplined, Harold had a reputation for being rough with black protesters. Bradley's mother, a homemaker who taught Sunday school, often made dinner table comments about people who don't belong in Maplewood. They were quiet insinuations, never said above a whisper, but they shaped Bradley's childhood worldview. Bradley idolized his father. To him, everything Harold did was justified because he was protecting the community. Yet, Bradley never truly reflected on what community meant. Through high school, college, and police academy, Bradley carried his father's beliefs like an heirloom, rarely questioning them. While Bradley never joined extremist groups or wore racist emblems, he carried subtle biases, ones that manifested in undue suspicion, especially toward black men like Kevin, who were confident, successful, and, in Bradley's view, disruptive. When Bradley saw Kevin receiving accolades on the news, recognized by the mayor, lauded by national media, part of him felt overshadowed, threatened. He told himself Kevin was stirring trouble, overshadowing the quiet order Bradley believed Maplewood needed. The humiliating aftermath of the traffic stop only fueled his resentment. The more Bradley was criticized, the more he dug in. While the investigation into Bradley's misconduct continued, Kevin tried to focus on the good he could do. He managed flood relief distribution, helped families apply for disaster assistance, and worked extra hours at the community center. He also saw a therapist after the incident, realizing the toll that racial profiling had taken on his mental health. Then one afternoon, a local teacher named Miss S. Carter approached Kevin with a personal plea. She explained that her teenage grandson, Damien, was spiraling into depression and rebellion. Damien, once a star student, had started skipping school, associating with the wrong crowd. Miss S. Carter believed Kevin's mentorship might help turn Damien around. Eager to help, Kevin agreed to speak with the boy. After their first conversation, Kevin discovered Damien's father had been arrested under dubious circumstances by Bradley Harper 3 years prior. The father's incarceration left Damien feeling abandoned and resentful. As Kevin worked with Damien, he learned that Damien's father's arrest might have been part of a pattern of racially targeted policing. Kevin began gathering stories from other families, compiling a dossier that seemed to point to a disturbing trend linked to Bradley's patrol record. Word reached Bradley that Kevin was investigating. Fearing for his career, Bradley began to panic, and in a small town, rumors spread like wildfire. People whispered that Kevin was building a case to get Bradley fired or even thrown in jail. Some nights, Bradley couldn't sleep. Memories of his father's proud face and the long line of Harpers in law enforcement haunted him. If he fell, he believed, the entire family legacy would fall with him. 3 months after the flood, Maplewood was still in a state of tension. The police department's internal investigation was moving slowly. Kevin had compiled enough testimonies and evidence to file a formal complaint. Through an attorney from the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, he submitted a document alleging that Officer Bradley Harper had engaged in a pattern of discriminatory policing for years. Local and state media descended on the town for a council meeting, in which the mayor and police chief were set to address the allegations publicly for the first time. The old town hall, with its faded white columns, overflowed with anxious residents. Protesters gathered outside, carrying signs that read, "Justice Now," and "Stop Police Racism." Across the street, a smaller group held banners saying "Support our police" and "No witch hunts." Inside, tensions were palpable. Kevin, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, sat with Damien and other youths who had come to share their stories. Bradley stood with a handful of officers, arms folded, silent fury etched on his face. The mayor opened the meeting, trying to maintain order. People in the audience occasionally shouted out of turn. After a lengthy introduction, Kevin was invited to speak. He stepped up to the microphone, heart pounding. Quietly, he recounted the flood rescue, the infamous traffic stop, and the subsequent stories he'd gathered accounts of false charges, unexplained detentions, and threats. Some audience members gasped, others mumbled in disbelief. Throughout Kevin's testimony, Bradley's face grew increasingly red. Finally, when Kevin finished, Bradley's lawyer demanded to respond. He insisted the complaints were exaggerated, that criminals often fabricated stories to smear good officers. Yet the tension had reached a breaking point. A wave of support for Kevin surged from the crowd, people who had witnessed or experienced harassment, finally feeling emboldened to speak. At that moment, thunder boomed outside, reminiscent of the night of the flood. As if on cue, the lights flickered. In the midst of the heated council meeting, a panicked call came over the police radio. A massive fire had broken out at an abandoned textile factory on the edge of town. The building was old, filled with chemicals and flammable debris. Maplewood Fire Department scrambled to contain the blaze, but they needed backup. Thick black smoke began to blanket the sky. Worse still, word came that several homeless individuals, who occasionally sheltered in the abandoned factory, might be trapped inside. Within minutes, first responders, city officials, and concerned citizens poured out of town hall. The hearing adjourned abruptly as everyone rushed to the scene. Fire trucks encircled the factory, water hoses blasting the inferno, but the flames roared, threatening to spread to nearby houses. Kevin arrived with a group of volunteers, including Mark Davidson, the man who had helped him during the flood. As black smoke billowed, Kevin heard a cry for help from inside the factory's collapsing walls. Ignoring warnings from firefighters, Kevin grabbed a discarded wet cloth, covering his mouth and nose as he darted inside. Flames licked the ceiling beams, and thick smoke reduced visibility to almost zero. Kevin stumbled over debris until he found two homeless men trapped under a fallen metal sheet. One was unconscious, the other barely able to breathe. Meanwhile, outside, Bradley Harper stood amid the chaos, watching as Kevin once again risked his life to save someone else. A flicker of conscience tugged at him. Without thinking, Bradley sprinted toward the building. A firefighter tried to stop him. "We can't have more people going in." But Bradley pushed forward, shouting, "That man's in there, and he needs help." Inside, Kevin had managed to free one man, dragging him toward an exit. The second man was still pinned. Kevin heard the factory's rafters creaking, about to cave in. Just as Kevin hoisted the unconscious man to his shoulders, the floor beneath him groaned and gave way. He tumbled into a shallow pit of splintered wood and twisted metal. The unconscious man rolled away from him, perilously close to the flames. Kevin's vision blurred. Heat seared his face. Suddenly, Bradley appeared through the smoke, coughing, eyes wide. Seeing Kevin pinned, he raced over, adrenaline pumping, and heaved a piece of debris away. Bradley hoisted Kevin to his feet, grabbed the unconscious man, and together they staggered toward a side exit. The building groaned, and part of the roof collapsed just behind them. In a second, they might have been crushed. Outside, paramedics rushed in. Kevin collapsed to his knees, gulping in fresh air. Bradley's uniform was charred, his face smeared with soot. They stared at each other, both trembling, hearts pounding. In that moment, no words were exchanged, but a silent understanding passed between them. The factory blaze raged for another hour before firefighters finally subdued it. Thanks to Kevin and Bradley, the two homeless men survived, taken to the hospital for treatment. The dramatic rescue was captured by local news cameras, which had been following the tension at Town Hall. Later that night, Kevin was treated for smoke inhalation at the hospital. As he sat in a hallway bed with an oxygen mask, the last person he expected to see was Bradley Harper. Yet there he was, standing by the doorway, hat in hand. Bradley cleared his throat. "Mind if I come in?" Kevin hesitated but nodded. Bradley looked uneasy, eyes darting around before settling on Kevin's. I wanted to say, I'm glad you're okay. And thanks for helping get those men out." Kevin removed his oxygen mask. "You saved me in there. I appreciate that." A tense pause followed. Bradley exhaled, shoulders slumping as though a decades-long weight was pressing down. Look, I know you probably hate me. And I can't say I blame you. Kevin didn't respond immediately. He studied the officer, noticing the exhaustion etched in his eyes. Bradley continued, his voice cracking slightly. I grew up, hearing things, believing things. I guess I never questioned them. But after everything that's happened, seeing you save those people during the flood, the way folks respect you, the trouble you went through, and now this, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I was wrong. He swallowed. I'm sorry. Kevin fought back a swirl of emotions: anger, gratitude, suspicion, relief. I don't hate you, he finally said, but your actions hurt me, hurt a lot of people. I know, Bradley said quietly. I can't take that back. But maybe I can do better. Kevin offered a slight nod. It's a start. Bradley's apology, while sincere, didn't immediately erase the damage he'd done. The official investigation into his conduct still hung in the balance. Over the next few weeks, more testimonies surfaced, painting a stark picture of racial bias within the Maplewood Police Department. The police chief, faced with mounting pressure, decided to dismiss Bradley from the force pending the final outcome of the investigation. A wave of mixed reactions hit Maplewood. Many argued that firing Bradley was overdue, that an officer who had systematically harassed citizens shouldn't wear a badge. Others believed the rescue at the factory redeemed him enough to deserve another chance. As for Kevin, he faced a dilemma. He had always stood for forgiveness and community healing, yet he also believed in accountability. When local reporters asked Kevin if he thought Bradley should lose his job, Kevin stated plainly, "That's not for me alone to decide. We have a system for investigations and justice. I respect that process, but I do believe in second chances provided there's genuine remorse and willingness to change." Privately, Kevin wrestled with what it meant to forgive someone who had so blatantly harmed him and others. Forgiveness, he realized, did not mean forgetting or ignoring injustices, but it could be a step toward rebuilding trust if the other person worked for it. Bradley soon felt the sting of his actions, a harsh karmic reckoning. He lost his position on the force, at least temporarily. Bills piled up. Neighbors he once considered friends suddenly avoided him. Conservative community members who once applauded his strict policing backed away, unwilling to be associated with the controversy. Bradley's wife, Linda, was furious at first. She had to pick up extra shifts at the local grocery store to pay rent. Tension filled their house. His father, Harold Harper, was not sympathetic. The old man sneered, blaming Bradley's downfall on the softness of society, calling Kevin and other activists troublemakers. Feeling no support at home, Bradley's mental health spiraled. He realized that the path he'd always walked, believing he was a righteous enforcer, had led him to a dead end. Job applications went nowhere. Prospective employers either knew his story or questioned why he left the force. Eventually, in a desperate move, Bradley took a part-time security job at a local shipping warehouse. It was humiliating to him, wearing a private guard uniform, with none of the status he'd once clung to. The nights were long, the work mundane, but in that quiet, lonely environment, Bradley had ample time for self-reflection. He started reading books about civil rights, recommended by a sympathetic coworker who recognized his turmoil. At first, the words stung. He read about Martin Luther King Jr. and the protests in Montgomery. He learned about systemic oppression. He learned how racist policies had shaped towns like Maplewood over generations. Each page weighed on him. He began to see how he'd been part of a larger mechanism of harm. Guilt gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Kevin carried on with his community work, returning to the routine of mentorship programs and volunteer efforts. Even though Kevin had garnered more praise than ever, he was asked to speak at local churches, on radio interviews, and at the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Atlanta. He insisted on turning the spotlight back on the issues. He used every platform to highlight the need for police reform, affordable housing, and better support systems for marginalized communities. Damien, the teenager whose father had been arrested, slowly began to turn his life around. Kevin helped him find a part-time job at a mechanic's shop, introduced him to a tutor, and even practiced basketball with him every Saturday morning. The once brooding teen showed signs of hope and ambition again. It was small victories like this that fueled Kevin's dedication. One day, while Kevin was helping clean up an old park on Maplewood's north side, he spotted Bradley in the distance. The former cop was standing by a chain-link fence, a hesitant look on his face. Kevin's first instinct was wariness, but he remembered Bradley's rescue in the factory, so he walked over, offering a cautious greeting. Bradley nodded. "Heard you were working on a community garden project here. Thought I might see if I could help." Kevin arched an eyebrow. "You want to help?" Bradley's eyes flickered with self-consciousness. "Look, I know a lot of folks here won't want me around, but it's something I can do. I got time on my hands, and maybe I can learn something, do something decent for a change." Kevin paused, reflecting on the youth he guided, teaching them that people can change, that redemption is possible if it's earnestly sought. "We can always use an extra set of hands," Kevin said quietly. In that moment, a small bridge was formed. Bradley started showing up weekly, turning soil, planting seeds, and hauling mulch. People side-eyed him. Some left the garden the moment he arrived. Others muttered protests. He shouldn't be here. Kevin understood their anger, but he also saw the shame in Bradley's eyes, the same shame that might blossom into genuine growth if given the chance. Bradley's slow transformation didn't happen without resistance. One afternoon, Harold Harper confronted his son at their family home. "What's this I hear about you working with that Mitchell fella?" he growled. Bradley, calmly for the first time in his life, stood up to his father. "Dad, Kevin saved lives during that flood. He saved me in the fire as much as I saved him. He's out there making a real difference. I was the one who did wrong." Harold's face flushed with rage. "You think you're going to change the world by planting some tomatoes with those people?" Bradley steeled himself. "I think I can change me." Harold stormed out. Bradley felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. He realized that for him to move forward, he might have to leave behind a legacy defined by hate. At the garden, not everyone was quick to accept Bradley. Some volunteers had family members Bradley once arrested. Others recalled humiliating encounters. Bradley found himself apologizing frequently, with no guarantee of forgiveness. Yet the more he listened to their stories, the more he understood the scale of damage he'd contributed to. He didn't expect them to forget, but he hoped to earn their respect, one day at a time. Months passed. Maplewood's police department concluded their investigation. Evidence confirmed that Bradley had engaged in racially biased practices, disproportionate traffic stops, unwarranted searches, and overly aggressive questioning. The final ruling was termination with no possibility of rehire. For some, it was a moment of triumph, proof that the system could hold officers accountable. For Bradley, it was a bitter pill, even though he'd expected it. Kevin, upon hearing the news, felt a swell of conflicting emotions. He believed in accountability, but he also recognized that Bradley had made significant strides to change. Ultimately, Kevin hoped the department would continue to reform itself, ensuring that no more officers carried the biases Bradley once had. Meanwhile, the Maplewood community braced for the next chapter. The local government established a civilian oversight board to review policing policies. Community leaders and activists, including Kevin, worked to ensure more transparency and fairness going forward. A new police chief was appointed, one who vowed to restore public trust. Strangely enough, Bradley kept volunteering at the community garden. Even after his termination became public, he returned with gloves and a shovel. It was as if the garden had become a place of atonement, a sanctuary for reflection and growth. Over time, a handful of volunteers who initially wanted him gone began to soften. They saw the consistency of his efforts and the humility in his demeanor. One weekend, Kevin organized a town-wide block party to celebrate the completion of the community garden. He invited everyone: residents, local businesses, church groups, and the police department. The aim was to create a safe space for dialogue, celebrating what they had achieved while acknowledging the work still needed to be done. Bradley stood on the sidelines initially, watching families dance to local musicians, kids playing games, and neighbors chatting over potluck dishes. After a while, he mustered the courage to approach Kevin, who was busy grilling hot dogs for the crowd. "I just wanted to say, thanks for not giving up on this town," Bradley said quietly. Kevin turned, offering a small, genuine smile. "Thanks for sticking around." They stood side by side, flipping hot dogs, passing them to eager children. In that ordinary, everyday moment, both men realized that Maplewood's healing went beyond either one of them. It was about the collective efforts of people choosing to connect, to acknowledge mistakes, to repair damage, and to strive for better. As the block party wound down, a surprising announcement came from Maplewood's mayor. He took the stage, hush descending on the crowd. "I'd like to recognize someone who has embodied the spirit of this community," he began. "Kevin Mitchell has given us his time, his energy, and sometimes even risked his life for Maplewood. In acknowledgement of his contributions, we are awarding him the Maplewood Humanitarian Award." The crowd erupted in applause as Kevin stepped forward. He couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Meanwhile, in the back, Bradley clapped as well, a subtle, relieved smile on his face. Kevin approached the microphone, clearing his throat. "I'm humbled by this recognition," Kevin said, voice wavering with emotion. "But I want you all to remember that this isn't about one person. Maplewood is all of us: the good, the bad, the messy parts we'd like to hide, and the hopeful parts we show the world. We have a chance to grow together, to hold each other accountable, and to support each other. If my story can teach us anything, it's that nobody does it alone, and change is always possible if we open our hearts." The crowd cheered, many wiping away tears. Bradley turned to leave quietly, not wanting to intrude, but Kevin spotted him and called out, "Bradley, wait." A hush fell again as Kevin extended his hand. Bradley hesitated, feeling the eyes of the entire town on him. Then, with a deep breath, he walked up to the stage. Kevin took Bradley's hand in a firm shake, pulling him into a quick embrace. The moment embodied Maplewood's new chapter, a symbolic gesture that healing, though difficult, was within reach. In the days that followed, local newspapers ran a front-page photo of Kevin and Bradley's handshake at the block party. Some labeled it a sign of progress. Others criticized it as too lenient on Bradley's past transgressions. Opinions remained divided, but the key takeaway was that Maplewood was no longer silent. People were talking about race, justice, and community in ways they never had before. Bradley, for his part, continued working at the shipping warehouse, quietly supporting his wife, Linda, as they rebuilt their financial stability. He stayed active in the community garden and even began volunteering at the local library, helping kids with reading programs. To many, it was an odd sight: Officer Harper, now plain Bradley, shelving books for children who used to fear him. But that dissonance slowly turned into acceptance, and acceptance paved the way for respect. Kevin continued his mentorship programs. He arranged for scholarships, helped the homeless find housing, and invited Maplewood's new police chief to speak with local teens about career opportunities in law enforcement, hoping that more diverse and socially conscious officers might serve the town in the future. Time marched on. The memory of the flood, the controversial traffic stop, and the blazing factory drifted into Maplewood's collective past, but they remained a pivotal chapter in the town's story. Public murals went up, depicting neighbors helping neighbors during the flood. A small plaque was placed near the garden, acknowledging the volunteers who built it. Bradley's name was listed among them, a testament to the possibility of personal growth. Kevin Mitchell didn't stop championing change. He formed a citizens' task force to regularly meet with the police department, ensuring open dialogue. The Civilian Oversight Board instituted new policies: body cameras, transparent complaint processes, community relationship training. Slowly, Maplewood's police force began to reflect the diversity of its population, recruiting from within the community, encouraging bilingual and female officers to join. Damien graduated high school, receiving a small scholarship to attend a community college in Atlanta. On the day of Damien's departure, Kevin gave him a ride to the bus station. Damien turned and offered Kevin a hug. "Thanks, man," he said, eyes glistening. "You believed in me when nobody else did." Kevin smiled. "You did the work, Damien. Keep proving everyone wrong." 1 year to the day after the big block party, Maplewood threw another community event, this time to celebrate the town's continuing progress and to raise funds for the youth center. The entire town turned out. There were games, music, and speeches from local leaders. Kevin set up a donation booth. Bradley and Linda came by, dropping off a check. "It's not much," Bradley said, "but I've been saving up. I want to help support these kids." Kevin accepted the check with gratitude. Every bit helps. The two men shared a quiet look of mutual respect. They knew they'd never forget the events that brought them to this point: the tensions, the floods, the fires, the humiliations, the awakenings. It was all woven into Maplewood's tapestry now. Maplewood was far from perfect. Unresolved resentments still existed, and the struggle against racism and prejudice was an ongoing journey. But a new spirit of accountability and empathy had taken root. Structures were in place that didn't exist before: oversight committees, safe spaces for dialogue, and community-led programs to uplift those in need. Kevin became a regular columnist for the local newspaper, sharing insights on community growth, recounting stories of unsung heroes, and urging readers to stay engaged. Meanwhile, Bradley remained an unlikely ally, showing up at council meetings to support reform proposals, volunteering for charity drives, and, when needed, publicly acknowledging his past wrongs. No one act had saved Maplewood, rather. It was a series of choices by Kevin, by Bradley, by the townspeople that steered it away from bitterness toward the hope of a fairer future. Their story reminded everyone that real change demands both courage and humility. Sometimes it takes extraordinary circumstances, a disastrous flood, an out-of-control fire, to reveal what truly lies beneath. In those moments, we see who we really are, and we get to choose who we want to become. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Maplewood, a place that discovered its truest strength when confronted by floods, fires, and the flames of injustice. Kevin's story reminds us that heroism isn't just about saving lives in dramatic moments. It's about standing for what's right, day after day. And though redemption is never guaranteed, Bradley proved that confronting one's own failings can lead to a stronger, more compassionate heart. If this story moved you, sparked reflection, or gave you hope that change is possible, please show your support. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that illuminate the resilience of the human spirit. Your engagement helps us continue spreading messages of courage, growth, and community, reminding us all that the path to justice may be challenging, but it's one worth traveling together.